Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined, as always, by the based Britisher. Good evening, sir.
I'm not even sure whether I should reply to that. Good evening.
I just know how much you adore the term, my friend.
Oh yes, it's one of my favourite terms. I like it almost as much as the word problematic.
So you want me to call you the problematic based Britisher next time?
Go away.
Please, yeah. We're also joined by Poe the Person, who's becoming somewhat more of a regular guest at the moment. How are you doing this week?
Yeah, good, thanks. I'm glad I've got a semi-regular spot. I feel like I'm going to be usurping the Britisher anytime soon. Just as soon as that kidney stone finally gets him, and I'll be here for the long run.
Any comment on that, Britisher?
Well, yes. When it comes to this kidney stone, it is definitely taking its time, and it's sort of trying to be considerably more amusing than I thought it would eventually. I thought it would be at the outset. It's one of these things that you have absolutely no experience of, and you just basically have to take it as it comes.
Well, I too take my time, and soon the co-host spot on Fake Accents Unite will be mine. It'll be my avatar that you see standing next to Not So Obvious.
Are you saying?
Will you be wearing a pith helmet, or will it be that Britannia number?
Oh yeah, it'll be with the spear of Britannia, and your head will be on it with the pith helmet.
You only can go one better than the British, and that's Lady Britannia herself.
Of course.
As you may have heard just there, we have a new guest, first appearance on Fake Accents. Although I've guested alongside him on what was it? Was it Unpopular Opinions?
Yes, it was the going for gold, wasn't it?
Going for gold. This is Owine making his debut. Nice to have you here with us. How are you doing today?
A pleasure, Not So Obvious. Shemai, how are we all? I hope we're all well tonight.
How do I address you? Is it Owine or just wine or?
Owine. Just
or just call him Owen.
My name is Owine, right? It's a Welsh name, but because people across the bridge can't say it properly, for some reason they can't get the two syllables right. I have to separate the two syllables out so they understand it. So when I was explaining it to people, I used to explain it like this. I used to say, you're at a bar and your mate gives you a glass of wine, and you say, "Oh, wine." That's how you say my name.
Oh, wine.
Do you have to have this lengthy explanation every single time you bring it up?
Every time with an English person.
More than likely wouldn't take that much explaining from you if you just wrote it differently. Because I think your main problem is that you've missed out the H in the second word.
People can say Dwayne. It's just like with an O at the front. You know?
Dwayne?
He's just saying that you're a whiner, Owen. That's what he's getting at. You see, Britisher. It's been 2 years, and I'm pretty sure we must be at like the 99th or 100th episode now. But I'm finally starting to understand some of your jokes.
There you go. See, it took a long time, but eventually we got you there.
How many hours? Sorry, go on.
Were you listening to Unpopular Opinions last week? And I'm pretty sure AA was calling us what did he call us? Idiotic sprogs.
Yeah.
I don't think I got to that point. I mean, I listened to the first hour or so because, watching the slow suicide of the Britisher on Unpopular Opinions is something I was obviously going to devote some time to.
Well, I think there was some time devoted to the fact that a great many of my references seem to just be going over your head and also the rest of the panels.
Indeed. I remember. The Beatles one I remember is the one where he lost it and called us Sprogs.
That was exactly it.
Yeah, because I called them overrated.
I maintain when it comes to the Beatles, I maintain that if you didn't like One Direction in this day and age, you wouldn't have liked the Beatles back when they came to prominence, because they were the equivalent back then.
I always thought One Direction was Take That than anything else. Was when you take that.
Oh, that entirely plausible. Yes.
Yeah,
Are you
that's all right.
really mentioning One Direction and the
Sorry.
Beatles in the same sentence?
Yes.
Yes.
Like, because you can talk about how the Beatles became wildly successful, and then they were able to experiment in their later years. But like their first stuff, I mean, I know that it set a new standard, but it was still their songs are fairly generic at the beginning. Come on.
They
I'm
sound generic
sorry,
now
just,
because they
you're
were-
not going to get me to in any way sort of credit the comparison of
The Beach Boys were
Take
better.
That or One Direction with the Beatles.
See, I know that the academic agent is sitting in chat seething at the moment. As he says here, awful take, I'm leaving.
I'm sorry, AA, sir.
Feel free to say whatever derogatory stuff you wish about the totally overrated non-artist who worked in advertising rather tellingly prior to becoming a musician that was David Bowie. By all means, there you can slag off what you want. But the Beatles, come on, you know.
Changes is a great song.
I'm just saying it to be inflammatory, Britisher, and I did cause AA to rage quit the stream, so that's always a good start. Welcome everyone. I did have some stuff we were going to talk about this evening, so we have got quite a lot to get through. The first is have all of you seen the Red Pill movie?
Yes.
No.
No, I can't.
No, neither. So just as a primer for those people who may not know, the Red Pill movie was a film by then feminist Cassandra J, who I'll pop the image up on screen. There we go, of the crew there, and it was basically her wanting to, as a feminist, understand the men's rights movement and what made them tick. And really, the whole thing was also a kind of... I wouldn't call it a vlog, but she intersperses these little clips of what she's thinking at different times throughout the production of the film.
Did she also get to interview Big Red?
She did interview a few high-profile feminists, but you have to remember Big Red was also just effectively a bystander on the street. I don't think she ever rose to any prominence where she was giving interviews and stuff like that.
Oh no, I do recall someone interviewing Big Red, and I'm somewhere in the back of my mind. I think it was the same woman who did that. It might have even been part of it. I'm not sure.
Yes, actually, yes, she did. I think I remembered one of the interview clips on her, that came out after the film. She interviews Big Red, but basically the reason for this is that one of the MRAs, a chap called Mark Angelucci, has just been murdered. He was killed last night in his California home, and aside from anything else, it appears to be related to a court case that he had. So it seems to be he was about to win a huge case in Mariposa County. Probably butchering that pronunciation. That had been going on for years. Can't say much beyond at this time. Incredible man. Did a lot of great work for the community, Fathers and Men, and I'm in shock. So yes,
Wow.
he was basically dealing with a big court case that seems to have been... this is all conjecture at this point, obviously, but it seems to be a hit, so I just... definitely wanted to say R.I.P. basically for him, because from what I saw of his work in the film, it was very, very worthwhile. But I thought it was worth mentioning at the beginning of the stream.
Certainly.
What was I? I was going to come on to... Yes, so there's the old namesake of this stream. We are on... it's called Jewish Privilege Edition, obviously, because I obviously don't want to be on YouTube for very much longer. But... the original name of this stream was Captain Charlotte Edition, which is due to the fact that Birdseye have had a rebrand. They are no longer Captain Birdseye. Birdseye is still the name of the parent company, but Captain Birdseye is now Captain Charlotte. And at first I thought
Captain Charlotte.
Captain Charlotte. dum 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 dum. And I thought it was a meme. You know, the source of this is Gloucestershire Live, and I thought this must be some kind of meme. You know, it's a Babylon Bee thing, but no, it's real. Foster mum Charlotte Carter Dunn will replace the famous captain on the Iceland and Birdseye packs of fish fingers for a limited time.
Yes, it's a temporary thing.
For what I understand, although I don't know how long this limited time is.
British show, it's almost as if they listened to the last unpopular opinions and just thought, hey, we haven't done that yet.
Precisely, yeah.
It's insane.
What I find strange is that the name Birdseye is not gendered. There was no reason at all to change the name other than to bring attention to the new mascot.
Isn't Birdseye actually? It's named after the person who invented frozen food, isn't it?
Yes.
Who mass-produced frozen food. That's why it's called Birdseye.
Yes, and it's also. Think of the cost of this, right? What are they trying to do? Do they think this is I can't get an angle on... Like, I can understand them running a competition or something like that, which they've done. You know, they've had people call in. But, is there not enough brand recognition for Birdseye fish fingers, which are, overpriced but well-meaning fish fingers, I suppose?
Well-meaning fish fingers.
Well, as far as a company goes, they've been, they don't have any particular political stances, as far as I can tell.
What a place in society where we have to say this company has no particular political stance.
But I just
the only thing I can say is you're talking about it, so it's working.
Yeah, I know. But is it going to make people buy more Captain Charlotte fish fingers? I don't know.
I want fish fingers right now. I got to tell you that much.
Yes.
I used to like having those cod bites. They were delicious. They've gone now somewhere. I don't know where they are.
They describe her in a weird way, as far as I can tell. And I understand to everyone this is a non-story. We have proper news coming later on, obviously. But it says the impressive 24-year-old. Impressive note. So you're going right. Well, what has she done? That's really truly impressive. Who lives in Gloucester, where she looks after 2 foster children, stood up from over 500 entrants for the time and effort it took to create her entry photo, where she did an impersonation of the famous seafarer, as well as for her insightful frozen food tips. That's the end.
Impressive.
So I'm going, is that what counts as impressive? Is that how low the bar has gone? I understand, chucking in a photo that did well enough to actually get the thing, but it's like she's a stunning, brave, impressive human being. She's got some frozen food tips, and it's very strange. Anyway, any further comment on Charlotte, Captain Charlotte, taking over the Birdseye namesake, even if it is just for 6 months or whatever? Because it must have cost them a lot to do up the reprints for this. Surely, I don't know.
Well, I think they do reprints of their packaging every couple of years anyway. It's just what you have to do to stay relevant. You don't want to keep unless you're Lion's Golden Syrup, you got to change your packaging every once in a while. So it might not actually cost any more.
See, the thing is, I don't understand why, in an age where we are basically getting all high on nostalgia constantly, why do companies always have to always feel like they have to evolve their packaging? Some companies go back. If you look at Dairy Milk, they've done that before. And other companies, but most companies keep going forward and keep trying to change up their packaging all the time. And basically, they are always at risk of making their brand unidentifiable from what the public would perceive it as on the shelf or something like that. Or they would say, because I think there's a certain comfort even in packaging. I know that's a bit very.
I think I know what you mean.
Very material to say.
I'm sure everyone watching is familiar with the show Peep Show. I watched that again from the start recently. It's on Netflix. And in season 1, I think it's set in 2004, and you'd be amazed at how nostalgic and comfy 2004 looks. Like in the shots where they're going around the supermarket. It's really it looks like another a world away.
Man, Safeways. Woolworths.
I would point to sort of two things when it comes to when it comes to this story. The first one is, why would you have a competition like that to start with?
Yes, that's the thing
So,
that I can't get my head around.
You know,
Marketing.
is it? Well, yes, but is it that basically they decided, oh, let's include the public and see whether they can come up with some funny Captain Birdseye, and then they suddenly unexpectedly got hit with lots of female entries, and then sort of felt, oh my god, how can we possibly reject these? Or was it that these companies once in a while do some focus grouping about their public perception, and the PR company kind of told them that, oh, you're too staid, you're too old-fashioned, you're too white male, and therefore one then desperately sought to rebuild this. To me, I feel that none of these companies are really acting because they're somehow completely sold on this, social justice agenda. I think they're doing it because they're terrified. They don't want to become the next target because they've seen in the past what it does to the company or to the person or the institution that becomes the target. So they're all acting out of fear. And I would love to know the background to this, as in how, what was the sequence of events that eventually led to this? Because I think there must be some people within Birdseye Frozen Foods going, what have we just done? We've just spent decades trying to create a brand image, and now we've put a woman with a captain's hat on the front, and we're kind of saying, oh, how wonderful and enlightened and progressive it is. And you just wonder, are there some people in the company themselves who basically are kind of wondering, is this actually to our own detriment? But they are that afraid that they will sooner go along with that, and they're just all waiting for the craze to pass, so they no longer have to jump through these hoops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go on.
I was going to say, we live in kind of, it's like, with social media and everything now, mob rule is so much easier, and I think that's what these people. That is what we're seeing, isn't it? We're just seeing we're just seeing kind of mob rule guide advertisement, because you see with cancel culture, obviously now with TV rolling and all those, you can see that companies are probably terrified of being cancelled themselves.
Here's something that I think it harkens back to. So, in the pre-Thatcher era, we obviously had the rise of the unions, right? And those were the people to appease in society. Thatcher comes in, destroys the power base of unions. Unions are now much less powerful than they were before. Membership of them isn't effectively mandatory for workers and that sort of thing. And of course, many of the good things that they fought for have been achieved. That sort of thing. Workers being treated seriously, and that sort of thing. But then we have like this period of time where there's not masses for companies to fear, and now we have the special interest groups, particularly on the left, although not entirely on the left, who have weaponized their interests. And I call back to one of Thomas Sowell's quotes, and I'm trying to remember what book it's from, but I can't remember. And he says, the interests of society, as in people in society, are diffuse, but the interests of special interest groups are, are very specific. And so it's better to ignore, because the diffuse interests of society are vague enough that it means that it's unlikely that people will, I suppose, coalesce into some kind of weird nationwide boycott in the same manner that, say, the unionized steel workers could apply to a steel company way back in the day. Whereas now it's flipped from economic issues to social issues. And so instead of the unions, you have the special interest groups who are claiming to effectively be a union on behalf of a marginalized community. And so these are the people which are leveraging the companies now. So that's who they fear in essence. And I wonder, because what is the move that's going to take the teeth out of the special interest groups in the same way that the unions were effectively defanged? That's the question I'm wondering about. And I appreciate that that's a little bit of a far cry from Bird's Eye Fish Fingers deciding to make an advertising thing. And I don't want to ascribe a particular motivation, but I do think that it's pertinent that this is a move that is happening now, and it's not a move that would have happened in the past. So it's it's interesting. Anyway,
if you don't mind a bit of a shift, if we're done here, you have introduced a wonderful segue into what I wanted to talk about. Which specifically references Thatcher and the unions. If you wouldn't mind me taking the reins quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I wanted to talk about this story of Leicester, which you may remember has locked down when the rest of the UK has been whatever the opposite of locked down, unlocked down recently. Leicester experienced
free is the word you're looking for.
Yes,
Wales isn't quite yet. We're more or less left is the way Leicester is right now.
Well, there's been speculation over this week that the spike in coronavirus sorry, I shouldn't have said the evil word. Now you get demonetized. But the spike in the very bad virus in Leicester it's been speculated to be due to these factories, which are being called sweatshops or slave labor. Basically, the conditions in these factories and the conditions that the people live in because their wages are so low has been contributing to the spread of the virus there. And I linked Mark an article about it that claimed this issue with the sweatshops was brought up earlier this year, and that it's a lie that it's only recently come to light that there are these sweatshop conditions in Leicester. But the speech that the MP for Leicester East made in February, maybe it was March, said that it was because of the unions disbanding. It was Thatcher's fault that these factories had been running in Leicester, in poor conditions and below minimum wage. Well, that's one way to look at it, but it's also undeniable that I think almost 100% of the employees of these garment factories with these poor conditions are immigrants, and I think many of them are illegal immigrants. And human trafficking has been thrown around as a phrase associated with this. And I know it's not very fun to talk about, but I did want to bring it up just because it's a news story that I think is huge, that has not been covered enough, or has not been covered prominently enough, in my opinion.
Sure.
Well, I had heard about this story, and remarkably, where I heard about this story was actually on the BBC. But
amazing.
It's one of these things that you have to catch it when it's broadcast, because unlike their other stories, they won't repeat that. So it's one of those things they can put on and then say, "Oh, we've covered this."
Yeah,
and they've kind of ticked all the boxes. It's a bit like some of those articles that you will, you will find a BBC web page on a particular subject, but if you actually go to their news website, there will be nothing. There will not be a headline on the news website which then links to it. So they are later in a position to say, "Oh, we covered this."
precisely.
You
For half an
can't say
hour.
we ignored it.
It'd be like an intern doing it.
But yes, but they clearly grant it no prominence whatsoever. So yes, I did actually hear that story, and they did go into that precise aspect of it. That it was being linked. Whether they kind of said, look, it's not really proven the link, but it is being linked with the virus spiking, and they even interviewed some they even interviewed some sort of immigrants or minority people, and I remember distinctly one chap they interviewed who said that his wife worked in one of these places, and it was kind of almost by the wife seen as the thing to do because it appeared that all the other wives were doing it. And he was kind of saying, look, you do realize you're being completely taken for granted here. They're not paying you the minimum wage and so on. So it's an interesting. It's there seems to be something to this story, so much so that even the BBC felt compelled to report on it, even though it was one of those things where they reported on it and then it quickly went under the carpet.
Well, let me read the article in question. So, this one concerns Priti Patel, who's criticised over comments on Leicester's sweatshops. She's come under fire over claims that cultural sensitivities prevented a robust response to alleged worker exploitation in Leicester, with critics arguing cuts to regulators, the decision to limit inspections, and an absence of unions were the biggest causes. 10 days after The Guardian reported on fears that conditions in sweatshops were a factor in Leicester's surge in coronavirus cases, as you mentioned there, Britisha, and resulting lockdown, reports emerged that Patel was considering new laws to curb modern slavery. She'd privately raised concerns that police and government agencies were turning a blind eye to the problem because they feared they might be labelled racist. It's not like there's a precedent in the country or anything like that.
Exactly.
What we haven't mentioned is that not only the people working there, but also the people running the factories, I believe, are, let's just say, culturally sensitive.
Yes, Patel was reported to have compared the issues in Leicester, where South Asian factory owners run an industry that largely relies on immigrant and BAME labour, to the Rotherham grooming scandal. Funny that, but critics say her reported views fail to account for the fact that in contrast to the Rotherham scandal, parliamentary reports, regulators and media coverage had raised concerns publicly about Leicester for years. Not really in the mainstream though, was it? It's not really in the public consciousness.
Yes, I can honestly say I've never heard of this before until I saw that one BBC piece, that one time it was broadcast. I could well suspect that perhaps within Leicester local media, this may have been covered in local newspapers or whatever. So one can then say, oh, this has been dealt with for years, but it's not as if the rest of the nation has ever heard of it.
There's also the other factor that it's, from what I could see, which was just that one speech that the Guardian article brings up, and you're about to read that part, but the MP brought it up, and she could say that she brought it up, but she nowhere mentioned any cultural angle on this, and no factor concerning immigrants or BAME. She only mentioned the fact that the people working in the factories were women and that they were earning less than minimum wage. That was the affront that she was worried about, not the working conditions or the
that interview I saw with the chap who was talking about his wife. It really didn't sound like a workforce that you really could unionize. It almost sounded as if this was just something that a certain part of the community did.
For a start, you'd have to teach them English.
That would more than likely be a significant part of that, yes.
Let me see what we've got here. So they want to strengthen regulators, because of course they do. And the extent of government cuts to enforcement, again, blaming it on austerity, even though this has been going on.
It's a checklist of who to blame, isn't there?
Longer than austerity, presumably. This is something that they've been going on, much like the fruit farms in the south. I can see that this would have gone on for much longer.
I remember 20 years ago hearing that much of the surviving textile industry in Britain was in the hands of Asians. So, if that was the case back then, chances are they were pretty much hiring immigrants, particularly immigrant wives, already then. So my assumption would be that this is just simply the continuation of something that has been in place for decades.
Yes. I imagine that it works under a similar, it's primarily women-owned immigrants and presumably primarily female migrants, who are, I suspect, under similar contracts to as I say, the fruit pickers. So they will be offered a flat, it'd be a space for 4 people or something, but they've got 20 in there, and basically that rent will come out of their wages, in quotes, but it'll be an extortionate price, and it means that they're being paid very, very, very little. And this sorry?
I was just going to say, talking about fruit pickers, do you hear about the farm in Malvern, is it?
No, go on.
There's been an outbreak in a farm in Malvern. I think 60 have tested positive, and they've been they were described as seasonal workers, so you can tell where they are from. It was a fruit picking farm.
Romanian then.
You're Romanians, and they all live on static caravans on site, and they've been told to live there, to stay there permanently with food brought to them.
Grief.
Yeah, so it's if you notice as well, there's a trend happening now between how the virus is spreading. It's always in there's in one of 3 things, or all 3. It's obviously in close conditions, in close working conditions.
Yeah.
In areas of where you typically would find lots of migrants.
Yep.
Or in cold and damp places.
And poor hygiene.
Like meat packaging plants, areas with lots of refrigerators, markets, example. You're starting to see that, because you can start seeing how the virus operates, by viewing this.
I mean, it's from everything that I know about transmission of this particular virus, I think it's more the case. It's probably more the case that you're talking about a low hygiene population who are not just working together but living together in spaces which are far too small. So it's not like the traditional British household where it's a single family, possibly up to 5 or 6 people in a house or in a flat. Instead, you've got 10 to 20 people in a space meant for 5. Very poor comprehension, possibly of both English and the hygiene standards that are required. The landlords are certainly not maintaining the place in the way that they should, and it's just inevitable that if you have dilapidated housing, a population who doesn't understand good hygiene, and I'm not saying this because I think Romanians are dirty or anything like that. I just think that the migrants who come over, low-skilled workers who are not, have come from probably rural Romania, are not going to have the same hygiene standards as, traditional British, native Brits anyway.
It doesn't help when you're sharing a bathroom with 10 other people and you're sleeping on a mattress on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. So, even if you wanted to keep the place clean, it's very difficult. Because I can't imagine that they're being provided with a wage or cleaning products which would allow them to keep things clean in the way that they want.
The best thing to compare it to is to have a student digs for 200 students, and then see how you fare.
Yeah, except every student gets a room at least.
Well,
Yeah,
yes,
but
this is
what
what I
about
mean.
kitchens?
Take 200 students, just take your average 200 students, but then house them in the same way as these migrant workers would be housed.
Right.
And you would get the same result.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
No arguments here.
Okay? Yes, I think that's kind of a given. No heating, dilapidated housing, no low hygiene standards, and packed in like sardines. That's the general gist, anyway. But all of this comes in, this whole thing about sweatshops in Leicester, fruit picking farms and whatnot, comes amidst a report that has found that there are 100,000 plus victims of modern slavery in the UK. This coming from the Justice in Care and the Centre for Social Justice, which put the number of victims at 10 times government estimate. Now, unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to read through the report in its entirety, but I'll give you.
One is always a bit skeptical when one hears a figure like that.
I know. I'll give you the cliff notes. So they say there could be at least 100,000 victims in the UK. The actual number likely to be greater. Human trafficking and organised crime groups are running riot in many communities. Many thousands of children, women and men of all nationalities and backgrounds, because of course they have to say that, including a growing number of British citizens, continue to be trafficked and exploited for profit by these ruthless criminal networks. Criminal networks in the UK, ladies and gentlemen, would you believe it?
Never heard of such a thing.
Never heard of such a thing. It's not like people who try and call it out are getting shut down or anything. The report calls for slave masters and organised crime groups to start facing justice, with the crimes currently amounting to low risk, high reward. And again, just tying back to Priti Patel's statement that she believes that a lot of the reason this hasn't been dealt with, despite the fact that they're claiming it's been brought up before, we certainly haven't heard any of it. Apparently it was raised in January by a minister in the Commons.
That's the thing I'm talking about.
Yeah, but it's, as I say, it's not something in the public consciousness. It's not on everybody's lips. It's not something that people are talking about. And so, I consider that to be a failing of the media to get the story out there. But the concept of fears of racism doesn't surprise me, given that and I bring it up fairly often, but the Macpherson report has only done more to strengthen the police's resolve to avoid being tarred with the phrase racist more and more and more and more.
Well, when it comes to these sort of figures, I have an example that may be relevant, and that is some years ago, this perhaps dates back 10, 15 years, something like that. There was an estimation made, again, in some report or whatever, of there being tens of thousands of trafficked women from abroad who had been forced into prostitution.
Yeah.
And again, this made for great headlines. And a bit like, the various social justice statistics, it was one of those figures that kept on popping up. It kind of had a life of its own. Once in a while, it would suddenly, you see, it was established in this report, in this study, in this scientific whatnot, And all the while, people were sort of saying, well, where are they all? That once in a while you have police kind of raiding some brothel in Britain, because, brothels are illegal as such as institutions and whatever. And they never found any women in sufficient quantity to actually in any way ever justify that total. And the figure just persisted nonetheless, even though it seemed quite clear that, either there were just tens and tens of thousands of brothels around the country that somehow had escaped the notice of the police, or this figure was just complete, rubbish. It had just been sort of, pulled out of thin air, because the reality just didn't seem to reflect it. And when it comes to something like, there is slavery in the country, again, this is one of these subjects, a bit like the other, because that would be sexual slavery, and of course it ties in with issues of misogyny and whatever the feminists want. With this one, again, it's one of those sort of social justice touchstone subjects that you can see all of them fervently want to believe in. And you just sort of think to yourself, well, yes, but will they ever find, with the various raids they make or whatever, will they ever find enough people to really justify this figure? Because I suspect 10 years from now, we are still going to hear about this figure once in a while. Even though between now and in 10 years' time, they may have found something like, 17 people.
I will go through the report after, in the week, and I'll probably make a video on it. Basically assessing what you're saying here, British, which is, what was the methodology? What are they actually saying? How many did they actually find? I don't think necessarily that the brothels comment is necessarily quite the same. I mean, for a start, sex workers, from every study that I've read, rather than personal experience, a lot of them tend to consider themselves to be just, it's an illegal practice, but only really for the people, their clients. They know they can get away with it. Prostitution's been legal in the UK for yonks now. So
Is it?
yes, like prostitution is legal. Solicitation is not. So they can't.
It's neither illegal for the women nor for their clients. It's basically having basically a place where it takes place.
Yes, you're
or
not
in
allowed.
any way advertising the service or whatever. That's strictly speaking illegal.
Yeah, they're not allowed to street walk, and they're not allowed to have a place of business that profits off sex work or something like that. I don't know.
It's one of those it's one of those completely hypocritical laws whereby it can happen, it just can't happen.
Yeah.
It is a bit awkward because you can, if you had a friend who you wanted to have sex with, and you decided to say to this person, I don't even know how it would work exactly, but if you somehow came to the agreement that this person would have sex with you and that you would pay them, but you didn't, you met through some other means.
What, you're friends and you're like, I can get you out of debt, but you'll have to sleep with me. That seems a bit bit like blackmail or
that is coerced. I believe that's coerced. Was it sexual assault? That'd be the word.
Maybe. But I would like to comment. I'm not an expert on this subject at all, but I think to respond to what the Britisher was saying about this statistic about slavery, I think in this one it's not the number that's funny, it's the and by funny I mean sort of untrustworthy. I think it's more the definition of slavery, and so it seems that slavery could mean as little as paying someone less than minimum wage, or paying someone in only room and board. I don't think slavery means...
Au pairing is slavery.
Yes. I think perhaps slavery does not entail you keeping anyone prisoner in the way that you might imagine slavery.
I need to...
It really means that.
I need to go through the methodology of the paper. That's the thing, to find out what a question... in much the same way that it was disingenuous of the... I can't remember the name of the two organizations, the big feminist organizations in America, claiming 1 in 3 women will either have been attempted to be raped or will be raped in her lifetime, which effectively made rape something like 90% of all victims of crime in America.
I think Christina Hoff Sommers is still waiting on some of that data.
Yes. We know that in a similar study in the UK, which just looked at Europe-wide, that they included things like being rejecting someone who asked you out at work and make-up sex as in the same category as actual assault and rape. So it's
well, no, in the mid-90s, she wrote a book in which she basically debunked a lot of this stuff. But as she was writing to the various academics, asking them for their original data so that she could actually see, as you just described, the methodology, how have they arrived at this? As this was happening, they began to sort of clock what she was doing. So kind of the feminist grapevine seemed to kind of send out a warning, as in there is someone out there trying to work out what we're actually up to. And whereas at first it seemed easier for her to get some of the original data, eventually it was made more and more and more impossible. And she kind of go in the book, if I remember rightly, in the book she goes into what lengths she was needing to go to try and get to the original source data. And I think with some of the studies, she was still waiting for it at the time of writing the book. Because, yes, they then basically realized, oh, Christ, this woman is going to debunk everything we've ever done. We're just not going to let her have it.
As the woman on the panel, since you brought it up, there's something that I've been thinking about making a video about, but I'm a little bit too squeamish. So maybe it's good to bring it up in a stream, because the whole rape and the sexual assault thing's really taken a backseat recently. But for a while, it was sounding like the definition of rape could be expanded to include having sex with someone, when you're not really fancying it. When you would probably rather not do it, but you're doing it as kind of an obligation, in a relationship.
Favor.
Yeah. Well, look, if you help your friend move house, you're not doing it because you really want to help them move house. You're doing it as a favor, because you're friends. And it's not that unusual for women to have sex in such a manner as well. Sometimes it's just easier. I'm not speaking from personal experience.
I have questions for my other half when she
This
gets
is a brave
home.
discussion.
What I'm saying is that when we talk about that sort of sex being rape, all statistics go completely out the window, because you're approaching like almost 100% of women who have ever had sex at that point.
As we speak, Scarlett Johansson's Twitter account is being bombarded with offers should she need any help moving house.
I think it's also, as people in chat have mentioned, £4.50 an hour, something like that. It depends on where you are, it depends on the community. I don't know whether or not they're defining this as anything below minimum wage, or disingenuous contracts, perhaps, that's basically doing it, or 100% commission work. Does that count? That sort of thing. But so I think we'll knock the modern slavery question on its head for now. But we will move on to a slightly adjacent topic, which is that if you recall, at some point when they were trying to get Nigel Farage cancelled again because he went down to Dover, I think it was, or Brighton, and Bournemouth, and looked and saw that the French were ferrying across migrant boats. We have 15 migrant boats which turned up on Sunday. This coming from Westminster again. More than a dozen migrant boats were intercepted in a single day yesterday as the problem of illegal immigration to Britain continues to get worse. In total, 15 boats carrying 180 migrants were intercepted. Border Force and RNLI intercepted the numerous vessels throughout Saturday. They ranged from 2 to 22 on board each one, and the Home Office say that the French authorities prevented a further 200 plus migrants from crossing the Channel as well. It's interesting that I don't know how arbitrary it is that they are escorting them across, but it seems to me that this story has kind of, I suppose, I know it's coming from Westminster, which is not exactly, the mainstream, but presumably the Home Office having to giving out a statement about this is directly because people have been mentioning that, they need to deal with some backlash which they've been receiving about the migrant boats being escorted by French vessels and then by our own Coast Guard into port. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's all a consequence of, you might remember a few years ago when that photo of the little boy washing up on the beach tragically went viral, and ever since then it's been, from my understanding, that's been the policy, is to make sure that no boats will crash in the water, that people trying to get here won't drown, basically, if they're known to the authority. I said the escorting is necessary.
The question is why aren't they taken back to France instead of here? Because why aren't they taken back to the country of origin?
Well, it does sound as if 200 of them were.
But then another, how many was it?
180.
180 weren't.
So basically half of them were intercepted by the French.
I just want to double check, right, that I'm not mischaracterizing this. So, more than a dozen migrant boats were intercepted in a single day yesterday as the problem of illegal immigration continues to get worse. 15 boats carrying 180 migrants were intercepted. Now, we don't know what happened to them. Presumably, if we intercept them, they're far enough into our waters that they are currently under orders to bring them in. Because I can't imagine that they're sending them back to the French. Right? This article is unfortunately quite sparse on details. But if they're bringing them in, I word this out before stream. If this continued every day, and I'm presuming that this is like a higher end, but let's assume for the sake of argument that this is every day. That's an extra 50. That's a huge amount, and especially considering they are all undocumented persons.
I think the question is more a bit like with the drug trafficking, where once in a while the police manage to get a giant haul and they line up all the packets of cocaine and they tell you what its street value is, and they kind of give themselves a giant pat on the back telling you how they have stopped this from getting into the country. And as someone of a certain vintage, I can tell you that the hauls have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. And all they really are indicative of are how the overall import is going up, how the loads are getting bigger.
Yeah.
And therefore, when they tell you that they've intercepted 180, the question therefore has to be how many did they not intercept? How many got through?
So it's essentially they're capturing the same percentage every year, but the actual amount of percentage is worth. Is going
if you
up.
think of it, you've got the French on one side with 200 and the British on the other with 180, which is a kind of similar figure. So you can't help but feel that there might be one or two patrol boats on the French and on the British side, kind of sort of frantically zooming to and fro, trying to kind of capture these boats. And meanwhile, there must be a number that get through. I mean, these people that organise it, they must know what they're doing.
Right. So for the benefit of the doubt, and as people in chat are pointing out, conditions on Sunday may as well be perfect for this sort of thing. So assuming that, fewer come on other days, let's assume that just the net per year is only 30,000. Who do we think is staffing, all of these low wage, low paid jobs that, give them a place to live, and also they don't really care about the money because they've made it to paradise, in their own words, as long as, until they become disillusioned and then they go, why did I leave where I came from? Which happens quite a lot, if anyone's watched Borderless. But the...
who is not in a position to demand a minimum wage.
Exactly. These people who say, well, I've got no passport, I've got no papers, I can't prove my qualifications, but I can do this job. Can you just take me? Especially if they're going to a community which speaks their language, which is also a factor, I imagine, because I can't imagine many of them have great English, and on that side of things. But we know that they are not refugees, we know that they are not asylum seekers, even though some people will claim that they are, but they're coming in and they're the ones who are taking these jobs. We talk about how, I don't want to get all, they took our jobs and that sort of thing. But if you think about...
Turned into Captain Birdseye for a moment there. I think you should have joined that competition.
I think it's more of a South Park reference, Richard.
You also would have had the beard.
No, he's not getting the references.
No. Yes, you're looking at this thing and you're just going, every job that one of those people takes is another job that gets taken away from someone in the north who's in Leicester who could do with a job when they're young. That's the main brunt of it for me. And I just can't get over the fact that we do not enforce our borders in any meaningful way. We deny applications. We're obviously bringing in the points-based system, but if the points-based system effectively just drives more and more people to come in their boats, and the numbers of people who are the ones who are intercepted, but effectively they can circumvent the entire system because they get brought over, put into housing and told, well, coronavirus at the moment, isolate for 2 weeks, and then they just disappear because they hop on a bus or somewhere, or they have a contact somewhere who says, well, we're gonna run a minibus down at 3 a.m. You'll get on, and you'll end up in Leicester at some point. Then, what does it all matter? That's the thing which the Conservatives need to be and the government itself needs to be focusing on when it comes to these things, because without the strong borders, your points-based system may as well be worthless because people will find other ways to circumvent it. And
There's
I'm
something
not
else,
kidding, and I'm not kidding when I say that we should sink the boats.
There is also the fact that when your allies are your neighbours surrounding you, and your allies aren't doing a very good job of protecting their borders, so looking at the French, we have an obligation not to say create slums in Calais as
Yes.
allies, and thus it becomes very. I'm only saying this as a bit of a devil's advocate. It becomes very difficult for say like Boris or Priti Patel to be like, no, we're not taking any more in because you're going to hinder that relationship with the French, especially when we're in trade negotiations with them. This is me trying to play a bit of devil's advocate.
Also, when you say sink the boats,
Yes.
I mean sink the boats, comma and.
I
And
mean,
they'll stop calling.
turn them around, and if they won't go back, sink the boats, and the message will be clear very, very quickly. That's the thing. It has to be properly enforced. In the same way that I would have absolutely no qualms with the border force, in America, where they're trying to deal with the immigration in the South, for instance, the illegal immigration there. That you say, here are your points. You go to this with your application. Otherwise, we don't want you. And if you try and come across anywhere else, we'll shoot you. We'll mine the wall. Like that's it seems entirely reasonable to me to do that because the border needs to be enforced.
I'm disavowing sink the boats because bloody hell. But I think I can see what you're saying, and I'd be interested to see whether the number of people who have drowned trying to cross has increased or decreased since they started this escorting missions thing. Because I don't know if this is an exaggeration, but I've heard it said that they do not even bring enough petrol to make the whole crossing because they rely on the escort. So it would be interesting to see if more people have died as a result of these policies because now the crossings are so shoddy because they're relying on this.
Yeah, and
there might actually been more deaths as a result.
That's the thing, and I think if the risk goes up, then the people willing to take the risk goes down because it's just natural. I mean, who's going to send their kids over when they know they know they're going to get escorted? They've been lied to by the traffickers, perhaps about how much fuel's on board and how well they're going to make it. But if it just becomes clear, it's like no one makes it. Pretty much no one makes it. Then it's as simple as that. That information travels. If it becomes known to be dangerous, people are more likely to go through the headache of doing. It may even incentivize them to learn English so that they can actually process their application. Anyway, that's my position on borders. Anyway, Object of Hate says the Home Secretary and the French Minister of the Interior signed a deal over the weekend to set up a joint intelligence unit to deal with the people traffickers. And that's the other thing, is that the people getting rich off this are not the migrants themselves, but the people who are sorting the boats. But I remain skeptical of their ability to hunt these people down, if I'm honest. Just generally, or if they do, there's just another one willing to take their place. I think human trafficking is as old as the drugs trade and everything, and the war on drugs was a colossal failure, and a war on human trafficking will be as well, from a concerted effort kind of point of view.
The only way to get rid of this sort of stuff is by undercutting the market for it, by trying to either satiate the demand or remove the demand entirely. So when it comes to cutting people trafficking, there's actually very few ways you can do it without having to resort to certain techniques. that what one would be to, well, like we did in the past, colonize.
Well,
I'm just saying.
I'm not advertising imperial colonization.
I'm not advocating for it. But I'm just saying it was a lot of the reason why it probably wasn't as bad back then.
Well, Trump got in trouble. Well, was it 2017 for the Kids in Cages Act? I don't know what the
Yeah, have you seen the stats on that?
enforcing. Yeah, well, I don't know, but he didn't have to kill anyone, right? I mean, there's been these statistics about people dying in custody.
No, in
But
fact, him.
He just made it illegal, and he actually enforced the law.
Yes, so enforce
Actually,
the
it
law.
was
Turn
already
them.
illegal.
Like in the vast majority of cases, I don't think that sink the boats would become, it would be that necessary. I think the vast majority of them that get turned back, because who wants to die, right? When it comes to Trump's efforts at the border and the kids in cages thing, his policies with regards to bolstering ICE, bolstering the border force there, have led to something ridiculous, like 5 times the number of human trafficking cases now being brought, because, funnily enough, most of the kids who are coming across are not coming with their parents, but are coming with human traffickers who are using them as drug mules or for whatever purposes. So, enforcing the law works. I'm just going to run through the super chats that we've had so far. So Makuta Pterodact says, DM'd you a picture. You will be shocked. This is Hitchens before the black pill was taken, before the dark days of Blair. I will send this to Stream Chat for you all to enjoy. And
Excellent.
I will put it up for the stream as well, which I just have here. It's quite terrifying, don't you agree?
Oh my lord!
He's a grinning man right there. Having met the man, also the beard,
It's smiling. What is this?
In the same room as his brother, no less.
Immoral.
I can barely
It
believe
does.
it's him.
He does look like a communist there, doesn't he? Though.
It's not one of those face app things where they've put the smile on using AI.
Comrade Hitchens.
Do only communists smile?
No, but only communists smile like that.
Maniacally.
He does look maniacal. He's like
Eyebrows. That's the communist eyebrows.
I don't have a shark tank underneath my private island that I drop secret agents into at all. Yes, that's that smile right there.
Also, you could make a good Blofeld there.
Yeah, he missed his calling there, did Peter Hitchens. He shouldn't have become a political pundit and foreign correspondent.
Should have been a Bond villain.
He should have been a Bond villain. Mr. Will Guitar says, Jaws is 45 this year. I rewatched it, and I think it still stands. Do the panel have views? Before they mock the shark, many scenes people laugh at for fakery were actual real shark footage.
Right.
I think Jaws is one of those great films where they've mixed in something for everyone. So I can watch it with my husband, and he likes the stuff with the shark and the manly men stuff. But they've also got a lot of there's a real heart to that film. Really sweet moment.
It's a good film.
You know what I'm going to say, don't you, Britisher?
You're about to tell us that you haven't seen the film.
I haven't seen the film.
Oh wow!
One thing that I heard once was that Robert Shaw, the one who plays the kind of gnarly fisherman, who takes Richard Dreyfuss's character out on the boat to kind of look for the shark. I heard that on set he just brutally bullied Richard Dreyfuss.
Why?
And then no sooner did they actually get to the point where they start in the film to kind of get on a bit better, it stopped. So
It's method acting.
It seemed as if kind of in order to get the kind of on-screen chemistry, he really was the kind of the kind of hard-bitten, belittling swine talking about Richard Dreyfuss about, what do you think you are today? And it sort of, no sooner was it no longer necessary, it ceased.
Mm.
And you just wonder to what extent did Spielberg know about it? Was he perhaps the one who gave him the idea in the first place?
One thing I do know from I have seen the intro to Jaws, to be fair, but the scene where the woman is being ripped apart at the beginning and eaten, the screams that she gives out were real screams, because what they did in order to get the thrashing in the water was they tied ropes around her waist, these great thick ropes, and then basically yanked her back and forth. And I believe she broke multiple ribs during the course of the screening. And so her screaming, and everyone, you can imagine everyone on set going, gosh, she's good at acting, isn't she? When in reality, she's having her ribs broken by the set.
Bloody hell.
I think there's a similar thing happened in Rambo, the first one. So basically, the good one. I mean, I just recently saw Last Blood. It's hideous.
Look, there is only
the very first Rambo. There is sort of a scene where I'm not sure whether it's when he kind of jumps off a cliff and he kind of jumps into the trees and stops himself in the trees via the branches. But then, they have kind of a shot where the camera is still and he kind of from sort of vertically comes into shot from above and kind of falls onto this branch, stopping himself with his arms.
Yeah.
Well, apparently he couldn't quite stop himself with his arms.
Ooh.
So the pain
painful.
you see of Sylvester Stallone wincing and kind of pulling himself up is not acting, it's real because he did break a rib in the process.
Oh,
In a similar
feel that.
In a similar one, if you've ever seen Django Unchained.
I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, there's a scene where what's his name? Leonardo DiCaprio's character is going on a bit of a rant, and he slams his fist on the table. And as part of this, he actually cuts his hand on a shattered piece of cutlery or something. And this was
he shatters the glass.
He shatters the glass, and
he wasn't supposed to.
No, it was entirely ad-libbed, and he cut his hand. And so when he walks over to whoever the black actress's name is, and smears his own blood on her face, that's his actual blood.
Oh.
And he and the look of horror and sort of grossed outness on her face as he's like wrapping his hand in the tablecloth serviette is actually real, because it wasn't meant to happen.
You see, that's proper acting.
See, now I since everyone's done one actor, I'll do one as well now. So in Lord of the Rings,
Yes.
when Aragorn kicks the rock, in frustration, his actual frustration was real, because he kicked the rock thinking it was a prop, but no, it made out of styrofoam. But no, it was not. It was an actual rock, and he broke his foot.
Where does Aragorn kick a rock? I'm not.
It's a helmet.
Helmet. Sorry. Yes, that's my bad. Helmet.
He thinks the hobbits are dead. Yeah.
Yeah, they think the hobbits been because the hobbits have gone missing, haven't they? Because the orcs separated them.
Yeah, this is where my husband thinks that he's part of the show and does his orc impression. All right, their legs. They don't need those. I can't do it.
Oh,
Get those hobbitses. I can't do it.
We've gone way off track. But did you hear that there's a real life Rambo in Germany right now?
No.
Oh, yeah.
It was a news story that I only was brought to my attention just before the stream. But there's a guy hiding out in the German forest from the authorities. Apparently he's armed and he's.
They went to arrest him.
They went to arrest him.
He got a bow and arrow.
He really had a bow and arrow.
That's fantastic.
fantastic.
Okay, well, yeah, that's the story.
Going back, thank you, Mr. Wilguitar, for mentioning Jaws. We managed to string that one out quite a bit. Silly Sailor says, Lyle's Golden Syrup, probably due for a rebrand. Its packaging is a Bible reference. Surely the wokies will be there any minute telling us Samson was racist.
Yeah, well, the Lyle's Golden Syrup haven't changed their packaging for 100 years. That's why.
Yeah,
I
they're
brought
famous,
it up.
isn't it? And the same with their treacle, like treacle.
Yeah, the actual the recipe for it is the
Mm,
same, apparently.
amazing. The next story of the evening, if we move away from modern day slavery and all this sorts of things, we have, where's this gone now? Yes. So this is about Patreon. And just as a message to anyone who happens to be subscribed to me on Patreon, I would very much appreciate it if you moved your donation to Subscribestar. The links are in the description. But thank you very much. There's a Owen Benjamin who used to be on Patreon, earning something along the lines of $100,000 a month. Has had several former patrons of his, after his yeeting by the platform, file arbitration actions against Patreon. Patreon then sued those former backers in Californian state court, at which point they then used a clever workout unique to California law. Under Californian law, Patreon is obliged to pay in advance all of the arbitration fees required in a case involving these former backers, which is millions of dollars. In order to avoid them, Patreon moved for an injunction to shut down the arbitrations. Several people who are not lawyers claim that Patreon will prevail in its motion against Owen Benjamin's backers. The law is pretty clear. Patreon should lose its lawsuit and be sent back to arbitration. After Patreon sued Owen Benjamin's former backers, the so-called Bears, as they're calling themselves, retained a prominent lawyer to represent them against Patreon. So yes, they basically, what I believe this is, if I am recalling this correctly, is that after Patreon censored several high-profile creators, there's an arbitration law in California that allows the former backers to sue for tortious interference with a business relationship. Patreon, by banning a creator, disrupts the economic relationship between creator and backer. So backers can demand to have the disruption of this relationship sent to arbitration, which is $10,000 per case. So if 500 backers demand arbitration, that's $5 million in advance filing fees alone. So this is the way that disgruntled backers can fight back against Patreon. And this is obviously interesting to us as creators, but obviously also to the audience if you happen to be supporting anyone on Patreon, because this case will set the precedent for whether or not any other, if any of you supported Sargon, for instance, and the like, that you can then effectively sue Patreon if you happen to be in California. I believe. I don't think you can do it if you're not inside the States, but not sure. But this was also similar for a company called DoorDash, which had to pay $10 million to arbitrate 5,000 labor disputes and more. Any thoughts on Patreon getting its comeuppance, shall we say? Noting that Patreon is a losing business at the moment anyway. It's entirely financed from outside in the hopes that one day it will make a return.
Well, I hope they stop banning people. Would be good.
Yeah, I think they'll be forced to be honest with you. At this point, they haven't got much. They haven't got much of a leg to stand on right now. In terms
Of
of
course,
the. Sorry, carry on, Poe.
as a libertarian, we have to say that the government meddling in these business relationships to begin with is, on principle, a bad thing, but in this case might be advantageous.
Yes. Well, it wouldn't be needed in the first place if they didn't meddle.
I guess.
No, but it's a nice way, considering that we've, that you are speaking from the libertarian position there, Poe, which is obviously, the typical comeback to anyone who gets yeeted is, well, just create your own platform. And then, of course, we know that Maker Support had its Stripe, which was its primary payment provider, an alternative to PayPal, pulled out after activist pressure. And basically destroyed that platform, and a load of people got scammed because they couldn't get their money out. And then you also have Subscribestar, which I believe is hosted in somewhere in Eastern Europe or Russia. Certainly a Russian guy who runs it. And that's why that's effectively safe for the time being, but because the special interest groups can't get to them, they can't influence them in the same way that they can influence us over here. But it's nice to see a method of comeuppance that, even if it's only exclusive to California, is impactful because Silicon Valley's there. Any thoughts, Britisher?
Well, I'm a bit lost, I must admit, regarding this case. The way you described it, I don't quite follow what exactly. I understand the thing about, yes, they have to have a given amount of money that they kind of almost put up ahead as a deposit, but what is the grievance at the heart of this to start with?
So the law in California says that effectively Patreon is not allowed to be a publisher. They can only be a platform. So they in much the same way as social media companies have to dodge around these laws in order to justify whenever they censor anyone, they have to find actual terms of service violations and stuff like that. Patreon's a little bit different because it effectively hosts businesses who then have, they have customers, which are the supporters. It's not just crowdfunding or something like that. And so, because Patreon has taken away and destroyed the business relationship between the customers and the company, which, whether or not that's a single individual or not, Californian law says they can't meddle in that business relationship between the two if they are only being a platform, which is what they're registered as. Does that make sense?
Actually a platform, or are they a payment facilitator?
Yeah, in either case, because if they're a payment facilitator, they're a platform for payment facilitation, rather than a publisher who editorializes who can be on their platform or not.
I mean, if this is a sort of a legal angle to try and force some of these monsters back into their box, then all the better. Mind you, I think one always has to be skeptical about how successful these things are going to be.
Well, this is the landmark
big companies
case.
with big backers, with deep purses.
Well, you say that, but Patreon does not have purses at all. Patreon is a company that makes massive losses every year, and it basically has no money to do it. It's heavily in debt. And it really, this is the reason why they, unless you're on their legacy package, which is their 5% fees thing, they take 8% now from anyone who's new and coming onto the platform. So it's, they're desperately trying to claw money together. And the idea that, say, someone who has thousands of backers, if they get taken off the platform, can effectively extort $10 million worth of profits from them, which, noting that it's a company that makes no profit at the moment already, increasing those losses by a huge proportion is something that they're going to fear a lot. Who's Jack? I can't remember the name of the chap who runs it.
Well, I mean, either you'll have a situation where kind of other companies will become part of the thing, and therefore then funds will become available, or this in another way is just a way of folding the company.
Yes.
So in a way, those folks who feel they were deprived, whether they had been cancelled altogether, or whether they, as they say, feel that their relationships with their subscribers has been interfered with, they will then just end up with no account whatsoever because the company won't exist.
Yes, but the idea is whether or not this is comeuppance for Patreon. Effectively, the idea that it sets a precedent. If Patreon goes down, which, I mean, Patreon's going to fail in the next few years anyway, as far as I'm concerned.
Get woke or broke.
It sets a... for whatever Patreon successor happens to be in the US, in particular, it's going to set a precedent for them.
Well, it will set a precedent insofar as that they will seek to avoid any situation like this arising again.
Yes.
The question then is, does this mean that these companies will actually start doing what people want them to do, which would be the wonderful and ideal and an idealistic way of looking at it? Or does it simply mean that companies in future will have even more small print that everybody accepts when they join, which will preclude them from being able of bringing about this scenario again? Call me cynical, but can you see what I?
No, it's a very. Yeah, I think the British are maybe right.
Well, the British is unfortunately usually correct on certain
Yes.
things. But
I don't know if you saw, but Parler actually, just as Britisher says, it was revealed to have some very dodgy terms of service. That I don't know if it was this exact loophole, but there was something in the terms and conditions that specifically said that the user, if they ever want to sue Parler, has to put up some such fund for.
Well, I know.
In fact, from what I heard, Parler was basically saying that if Parler would be sued by a third party,
not by you,
for content on Parler, it could be the person who would put up the content that would be partly liable for some of the legal costs accrued by Parler.
Yes. I'm not sure how. I mean, I haven't read that bit. The worst stuff I've read, Parler, reserves the right to basically say that it has the right to remove your account irrespective of whether or not you have violated the terms of service. So
there are no terms of service, really,
and you have no recompense. Yeah, exactly, right. They're general TOS, so it's like stuff that you definitely will be banned for, but they can also arbitrarily take you off. Now, the people who run it appear to be, unless people think that it's a complete op in order to, basically
corral
all the conservatives and then wipe them off the face of the internet for another time, for even however briefly. It is certainly the case that it seems to me that the people running it are pro free speech, and this is a statement which is there so that they can avoid lawsuits effectively, because they can just basically discontinue an account if they're getting sued by a third party. Now, whether or not that incentivizes people to just constantly lobby them with third party claims is another matter entirely, but I don't know. I don't know how reachable they are, and I'm not legal literate enough to be able to comment on it, really, if I'm honest. Unfortunately, that's the best you're going to get.
At the heart of it is legalism is more than likely not going to be the way to solve this problem. At the heart, what we require, if you want to live in liberty, you have to live by the spirit of liberty. And if you really just think that it will be paragraphs and your right to sue or someone's right to sue you that will be protecting those liberties, then think again, because sooner or later some clever lawyer is going to find a way around it. And therefore, yes, the only way in which our societies can survive in this regard is if we actually stop the cancel culture to start with.
Yeah. And then we're back to what do we do about the social unions? That's what we get back to.
Social unions.
Chat, that's what I'm going to refer
take a running jump. There is no real other alternative. In the end,
there are basically you need someone to come in and state that there needs to be a return to. There needs to be a return to the period where the method of getting change done is to effectively lobby your MPs rather than the government being open to lobbying directly.
Well, you see, what I would like to see more than anything else is something going to court in this respect, and the judge sitting there listening to it all very patiently, and then when both sides have spoken, he just says, "This is a problem." Because we did have, we did have times way back when where we would once in a while get reports of how shall we say, a rather rumbustious judge basically telling folks to get out of his courtroom and basically just saying, "This is not an issue. Will you please go away?" And I remember that taking on some quite funny situations. And I particularly remember fondly some situations that were kind of reported that already then, of course, were reported as a complete outrage by the newspapers. That is, the Italian judge has said this to a woman about having her bum pinched. And, I know today, the walls would melt if an Italian judge just basically, told them to get over it. But we perhaps need to get back to a society in which judges tell people to get over it a bit more.
Yes. We need judges to start applying, I guess, common sense, and start applying some form of. Oh God, I just lost my train of thought now. Damn it.
What I would sort of look at is, one of the things we've done is we've sorted sort of basic problems for the majority and then for various minorities. But now the minorities we are beginning to address are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. So they're becoming ever smaller problems to our actual society. And as that is happening, the problems themselves are also becoming ever more a matter of interpretation of, this is outrageous, my right to exist has been abolished. And you just go, no, someone is just not calling you by your pronoun. These are two different things.
We've covered all the big stuff. Now
precisely.
We're stuck on the details.
The big stuff has been covered. We're getting ever more into the details. And as we're going ever more into the details, we're moving further and further away from sort of what we would regard as fundamental rights.
Yes.
And I think to a certain extent the courts should adopt some of this view, as in, and this is not just the courts, the politicians, the media, and I know I'm dreaming here, but the idea of, look, folks, it's not as if you're starving in the street. It's not as if you're being sent down the mines at 10 years old. Maybe some of the sort of histrionics we're seeing is not really up to what it's sort of claimed to be. If wolf whistling is the greatest problem in your life, maybe the problem is yours and not society's.
Yes, maybe you need to get a grip.
Yes, I mean, I grew up in what looks more and more like a completely different world. I mean, I remember builders, construction workers in kind of, having opened a trench in the street. And I know this will come as a shock to this panel, but I remember construction workers actually digging out trenches by hand in the street, not having one of those little miniature bulldozers on rubber tracks, but actually in the trench digging. And I would recall, seeing a young woman go by and there would be a wolf whistle or something like that. And guess what? The world kept on spinning. Life went on.
Now we've got, feel quite
was it Nottinghamshire? I think it was Nottinghamshire police that wanted, basically were arguing that they wanted to include that as hate crime, and they wanted to compile statistics, which was obvious what they were intending to do. They wanted the statistics so that they could argue that it needed to be made into a hate crime.
Yeah.
It's pretty classist as well. I mean, to say that anything is, there's a certain demographic of men who behave like this to women. You know, the kind of men who will call you love or darling. It's not the like university educated blokes. I mean, they've got their own set of.
It's not the middle
problems with
classes.
women.
It's white van man. It's
Yeah.
yes.
The also I do remember fondly watching an episode of the week that was where you mentioned being bathed in a tin bath. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. I was as a small kid. Yes, I was bathed in a tin bath. Yes,
That's just because you like the way it feels, Richard.
of course. Yes, you know, one has to somehow earn one's pith helmet spurs. What can I say?
In my shed, my family still has the tin bath from when my parents were small. Being in rural Wales, these things are still everywhere.
Well, you know, it's like
Brother and sister.
it's a little bit further back, but I remember when running water wasn't a thing throughout most of the country. So, you know, my granddad was very pleased when they moved into a prefab for the first time, because it was the first time they'd ever had running water and consistent electricity.
For us, being a bit younger, it's all about, in the future we'll be having this discussion. But remember when the internet wasn't everywhere in the country?
Yeah, I know, right?
It was like, remember dial-up?
Yes, the idea. You know, do you remember the times when not everyone had a mobile phone?
Yes.
I do.
Or when they had a mobile phone, but it was not a smartphone.
And the best thing you could play on it was Snake.
Well, yeah, if that. And I remember, the kid who had the mobile phone in class was something of a, is the other half live. But all right, folks.
Well, anyway,
I'm not entirely.
Can I just jump in, because I think I will kind of depart. It's my side is it's not agony, but I'm just trying not to aggravate
Richard,
this thing.
You interrupt as I just about to do the final summary and then close the show.
Oh, okay.
So
I'll shut up then.
Yeah,
Get on with it.
I'm not entirely sure how we ended up in a total nostalgia tangent there, but
Well,
thank you.
More than likely something to do with the Britisher.
But more than likely something to do with the Britisher.
I enjoy talking Britisher, but nostalgia stuff.
I'd like to thank everybody in chat for coming by. I know Sargon is streaming, so thank you very much for spending your time with us instead. Thank you very much to my guests. Thank you, as always, to the Britisher. Thank you much for coming, despite your growing pains.
An honour and a privilege, as usual.
And thank you to both Poe the Person and Owine.
Deal, thank you.
And yes, so have a great week, everybody. Take care. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Toodle pip.
No star.
See you.